Will you pray with me? Lord, may the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. We've spent the last few weeks of Advent singing and praying and hoping and waiting for the coming of someone. Depending on whom you ask and the age they are when you ask them, the answer will variously be Santa or the elf on the shelf, or for someone in particular to come home for Christmas, or, ideally, Jesus. In the church, at least, most people can come up with that last one. Jesus, they can say. Ask more, though, and it might get a little murkier. Yes, but who is Jesus? Why do we wait for him? Who is he really? If you're like most of us, your answer to those questions will be something that might generously be called nuanced, that might less generously be called confused, wondering, waffling, unsure. But maybe that's just me. If that's you, though, if your answer to the question, who is Jesus, always starts with, well, I have good news. The ancients didn't know either. Not really. I mean, some came up with clear statements and definitive definitions. The words of various creeds come to mind. But through most of history, most people who followed Jesus have been like you and me. Well, you can see it and hear it, if you haven't before, in O Come, Emmanuel, which we sing at least a couple of times every Advent and Christmas. 7 verses long. Each verse gives Jesus a different title, a different name, pointing at some aspect of who we think he is. The verses are adapted from something called the O antiphons. An antiphon, in case you're wondering, is something that is said, or more usually sung, as a response to a reading in a church service. Traditionally, as Christmas neared, the O antiphons were the ones they used. There are 7 of them, and one was sung each day in the week leading up to Christmas. They're called O antiphons because each one starts with, you guessed it, O, just as it does in the hymn. O Emmanuel, O Sapientia, O Adonai, O Radix Yesi, etc. They're in Latin, natch. Each of those titles for the Messiah is biblical. They all in some sense come straight from the prophet Isaiah, from the very selections you just heard Mary read. The antiphons were then loosely translated into English by a variety of people in the 19th century, and voila, our modern hymn. What I love about the O antiphons and about this hymn is how, on the one hand, they are wonderfully firm, powerful names, but how, taken as a whole, they are somehow tentative. The different names piling up on one another as if the writers refuse to put Jesus in a box, or don't know what box to put him in, as if they want to either hedge their bets when naming Jesus' nature, or to at least give him plenty of space for the fullness of who and what he is. And in so doing, they give me, and maybe you, plenty of ways into the delight and majesty of Jesus. So, for those of you who love Jesus but aren't quite sure who he is, herewith a guide to at least 7 of his titles. Oh, and by the way, there's a puzzle built into this sermon, so you might want to pull out a pencil now and be ready to see if you can solve it. As I say each Latin title for Jesus, write that title down, and we'll see what we can see. The first one in our song is, of course, Emmanuel. And of course, we run up against a problem first thing. In the O antiphons, O Emmanuel is actually the very last one sung on the 23rd. In our version, though, it's the first one, but both positions, first or last, are positions of honor. And this should give you a clue that somebody thinks this is the most important verse of all. Emmanuel means, you know this, God with us. And that title comes from Isaiah 7, where God promises to stand with the people against all that stalks and threatens them in the world. Look, the young woman is with child and shall bear a son and shall name him Emmanuel. Jesus, says the O antiphons, is God's very presence with us, our liberator and defender from our enemies. Many years after Isaiah's time, the Gospeler Matthew would powerfully hearken back to this line to name Mary as the young woman. Matthew would call her a virgin, and Jesus as the promised child. For those who are lonely, for those who go to bed at night and long for human touch, for those who wonder whether they have been utterly abandoned, Emmanuel might be the title for you. O sapiencia, or O wisdom, sapiencia, starts with S, that's all you need to know, is the first one that was traditionally sung. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him, Isaiah says in chapter 11, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding. Here, Jesus is described as the very wisdom that proceeds from the mouth of God. This will be echoed in Christian tradition. The Gospeler John opens his writings by calling Jesus the Word with a capital W. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus is not only God's wisdom personified, but the very word God uses to create the world and, as the Latin says, strongly and sweetly order it. For those who are lost, for those who feel about to be overwhelmed by chaos, for those who watch the news or surf the web too much and get lost in their depths, wisdom that orders the world might be how you'll want to pray today. O Adonai is translated O Lord, which is one of the names of God. In Hebrew, it's actually plural, lords. Ask a scholar of the Hebrew scriptures, and she will tell you that this does not refer to more than one God, but instead is what they call the plural of majesty, or what we might call the royal we. In those Jewish scriptures, God and God alone is addressed by Adonai. So again, this is a powerful claim for Jesus. He is actually the God that created heaven and earth, that Moses met on the mountain, that gave the law to the people. Later Christian thinkers would, of course, notice the plural in Adonai and see in it support for the claim that God is actually three persons. So this title not only claims Jesus as God, but God as being comprised of more than one person, a Trinity. If you're looking for an all-powerful Lord of the universe to pray to, one with justice and love in her heart, one that has all things well in hand and can be trusted to make them come right, Adonai might be your fave. Next comes O Radix Jesse. Radix means root, hence the vegetable radish and the adjective radical. This one is a little confusing because the claim is that Jesus is the shoot from the root of Jesse, not the root of Jesse itself, but whatever. It comes from the beginning of Isaiah 11. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. Jesse, in case you can't remember, was the father of David, not the first king of Israel, but certainly its most famous. The line of Davidic kings of Israel was eventually cut down by its enemies, left a stump, apparently dead. Isaiah promises that a new shoot will grow from the roots, as often happens with trees. That shoot will be the Messiah. Christians, over the years, have had great artistic fun depicting the Jesse tree, with Jesse at the roots and a great tree growing out of him with his descendants in the branches and Jesus at its crown. If you've ever wondered why we always use arboreal representations for our lineages, this is why: the original family tree. If you're feeling cut down to the ground, cut off at the knees, hewn to the very bottom, try calling out for the root of Jesse, the one who springs forth with hope in his branches when all hope seems to be lost. O clavis David, or key of David. That one may sound the least exciting of all, the key of David, but it might end up being the one that makes the most difference for you in the end. It's also the one normally assigned for today, the 20th of December. Isaiah in chapter 22 promises that the key of the house of David will be placed on the Messiah's shoulders. The house of David in both senses, house as in dynasty and house as in the temple, the meeting place of God on earth. He will have the power to open and shut, bind and free. And the promise is that he will use that key to, as the Latin says, lead the prisoners from their prisons and lead out those who dwell in darkness and the shadow of death. He is the life bringer, the resurrector, the freer from hell. If you're locked in depression, locked in addiction, locked in illness, if you're trapped in a bad job or a bad relationship or a bad life, praying to the key of David to set you free might be the way to go. O Oriens is usually translated O Day Spring, but it could just as easily mean morning star or even sunrise. Isaiah said, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined." This is why the manger always seems to be glowing in paintings of the Nativity, why Mary and Joseph's faces are lit up as they look down at the baby, the morning star right there in the manger. It's also, incidentally, why many churches use blue as the color of Advent these days instead of the more traditional purple. The deep blue represents the color of the night sky in the east, just as the sun begins to rise. Not all darkness is bad, but not everyone who's in darkness actually wants to be there. If you're longing for a light to guide you, a light to bring you hope, a light in the window to guide you home, a light at the end of the tunnel, turn to the east, for the day spring is on his way. Here's one where our song, our O Come, Emmanuel, wants to make the title a little easier for modern sensibilities to swallow. We sing Desire of Nations. The original O antiphon is Rex Gentium, or King of the Nations. But our song isn't totally lying. The first line of the antiphon is actually, O King of the Nations and their desire. So that's okay. The rest of our verse goes a little off the rails, though. The original says, "Come and save the humans whom you formed from the clay." No mention of making quarrels cease or of peace. But again, instead, another big claim that Jesus himself is the one who made the world. On the other hand, making envy, strife, and quarrels cease and filling the whole world with the peace of heaven wouldn't be such a bad achievement either. For those who despair at the quality of human leadership around them, who wonder whether our democracy is going to manage to elect a leader who will really lead, Rex Gentium might be an attractive name for your Messiah. So, there you have it. The 7 titles for Jesus: something for everyone, a way in for everyone, a song for anyone to sing, or at least a song to challenge you as we wonder together who this most mysterious coming child might be. Okay, and now the puzzle I mentioned earlier. A puzzle for those who love mysteries, hidden clues, and acrostics. Take your pencil and write, if you haven't yet, one under the other in your bulletin or wherever you can, the names of their antiphons in their original order. Here we go. Sapientia. Adonai. Radix, Jesse. Clavis, David. Oriens. Rex Gentium. Emmanuel. Reading down, you should have S-A-R-C-O-R-E. That's reading down. Now read from the bottom up. Take just the first letter of each of those titles. Did you get it? It's Latin, of course. You'd have to understand that. It says Ero Cross, E-R-O space C-R-A-S. A little promise from Jesus built right into the song we sing. Do you know what Ero Cross means? It means, tomorrow I will come. Scholars agree that this was almost certainly not intentional on the part of those who first created the O antiphons, but hey, it works. And just because it wasn't intentional on the part of the liturgists doesn't mean it wasn't intentional on the part of the great puzzle master. Now does it? Amen.